In this video, we will set up virtual domains on our FortiGate appliance. So virtual domains is the capability for virtualizing a physical firewall into multiple firewall instances, creating virtual firewalls, very similar to how you would manage multiple virtual servers on a physical server. So virtual firewalls are commonly used when you have multiple customer networks like here in this picture. So you can dedicate various interfaces to each virtual domain that will be used. And each virtual firewall is isolated between the other firewalls for its routing table and its security policies. So I could have 3 separate customers that we manage, and I can dedicate a particular WAN interface and a LAN facing interface that this can connect directly to their equipment. So everything here is isolated for their routing. So this will have their own default gateway and their own specific policies and VPN, etc. And the same details for customer 2 and for customer 3. So this allows this capability of virtualizing our firewall, our physical firewall, into multiple virtual firewalls that we can use and set up. Now in our network, here is the updated diagram showing what we will do. So we will create a new virtual domain called management. Now this will be part of our management network. Now there isn't a management interface on the firewall model that we're using. So we will put the DMZ interface into this new virtual domain that will be plugged directly into our management network. And I have included all of the interfaces and the IP addresses to the updated diagram that will be used on our network. So you will see that once we enable our firewall for virtual domains, it's going to automatically create a default virtual firewall called root. And we'll talk more about that later. But we're going to create a new virtual domain called management. And we're going to dedicate only one interface. And that will eventually be plugged into our management network. So this is the network for that. And that will be plugged into the core. So the core will be configured for VLAN 99 and configured for this IP address. So this will be the actual default gateway that we will use within this particular virtual firewall instance. So again, a larger version of this picture will be available in your package. So reference that when we configure this particular firewall for virtual domains. Right now, our firewall is under a single domain and it is not virtualized. It is operating as a single firewall. So for example, when we go to our interface page, okay, and this will show all of our interfaces. The WAN 1 interface, our LAN, our guest network, our BYOD network are all managed under a single firewall instance. Furthermore, if we go to our static routes page, because we did configure some static routes, okay, there you will see the static routes that we added, which includes a default route up to the ISP. You can see the various security policies that we created, like from our LAN out to our WAN, and of course from our WAN into our LAN, which involve configuring a VIP. So all of that is present here under our single firewall instance. And of course under security profiles, like our application control profiles, for example, we created many different profiles that we set up and use in our video series. Let's check out some of those profiles. Okay, and there we set up some profiles for staff users, for guests, contractors, and so forth. Under VPN, we can see our configured IPsec tunnels that we configured. One was a client and another was a site VPN tunnel. And under SSL VPN portals, we set up different portals for our staff users and our contractor users. Now let's enable virtual domains on our firewall. And to do that, let's go to the dashboard page. Then let's go down to the CLI console widget. Let's get connected to the CLI. So just click here. And let's enable virtual domains by typing in config system global. Then we're going to type in set VDOM admin enable. And that's it. Let's go ahead and exit out. This will go ahead and apply the changes. We'll say yes. Let's log back into our firewall, which is required. Okay, and there on the dashboard under virtual domain, you will see that this feature is enabled. You will also see that our sub-menus have changed. So it only shows global and it shows virtual domains. Everything else, like our policies page, our VPN, our security profiles, all of that is removed. Now, all virtual domains are created and managed under VDOM, which is right over here, which stands for virtual domains. And let's go to VDOM again. Okay, and here you'll see that there is one virtual domain called root, which is the default virtual domain that everything is associated to. So for example, we see the list of the interfaces that is part of that root domain. We also see the amount of CPU and memory resources that are used. Under global resources, also under VDOM, this will show the specific resources that are used, such as the session counts, to the number of firewall policies and so forth. Let's go under our interface page now and see what that looks like. Okay, so here we see most of our interfaces and we see that they're all associated to the root virtual domain. Again, we will put our DMZ interface into a new virtual domain that we will create called the management network or management. When we go to virtual domains, this will list all of the virtual domains and each of the configuration menus that we saw before we enable this feature. So for example, there is a network section, there is a router section, policy objects, security profiles, and VPN. So these sections will appear for all virtual domains that are created on our firewall. So under our root domain, you will see all of our configured interfaces and sub-interfaces that exist within this particular virtual domain. We can see all of our static routes. Remember, we had a default route going to our ISP and other static routes that we showed you before. So everything is still here. When we go to our security policies, and check that out, you will see our different policies from the LAN to the WAN and WAN to the LAN, and we configured a VIP for one of these. All that is present under this virtual domain. We configured many custom application profiles for different user groups. We can view that information here as well. Okay, so there is our staff, our guests, our contractor application profiles. Let's go ahead and close up some of these options here to clean things up. That's important. And of course, under VPN, you will see our VPN tunnels that we have set up, our client and site VPNs, and of course, we can't forget our SSL VPN portals. Therefore, this is where we would need to go for configuring anything specific for our main firewall. These are the actual sections that if we need to add a new policy, add a new route, and add a new VPN profile, for example, this is where we will go to configure all of those particular details. So that's very important. Let's now create a new virtual domain. And to do that, let's go back to the VDOM page. We will create new here at the top. And this virtual domain will be called MGMT for management. Now make sure that this is enabled, which it is. And in terms of the operation mode, we will leave it at NAT, which is the most common. The other option that we can select is running in transparent mode. So that is it. We are done. So let's go ahead and create this virtual domain. Okay, and now it is listed, which only shows, here it is, our management virtual domain in NAT mode is enabled. And it only shows the SSL sub interface. Nothing, no other physical interfaces are associated to this newly created domain. But let's change that. And we're going to put the DMZ interface under this virtual domain. So let's go to the interface page. Okay, and let's edit the DMZ interface. Then let's change the virtual domain to management, which is right here. Now let's go ahead and configure an IP address to this DMZ interface, which is what we will use for managing our firewall moving forward. And this would be the IP address that we reflected in our diagram, which is 192.168.101.19. So let's go ahead and configure that address. Okay, so now we are done. Let's go ahead and save our changes. Now we see that our DMZ interface is now associated to the management virtual domain. Let's now go to the submenu for virtual domains. And let's go ahead and close up some of these menus here. Okay, so now we see two virtual domains this time. There is root and there is management. Within the management virtual domain, let's look at the current static routes that may exist. And you see that there's nothing listed because nothing has been added under this virtual firewall. And the same for any security policies. There should be no specific policy that should be added here. And the same for any VPN tunnels. Okay, nothing is listed here because everything that we configured on the network was under a different virtual firewall, which would be the root virtual domain. Let's add a default route under the management domain. Therefore, under management, let's go to the static route page. So it's right here. And let's create a new route. The destination and mask will be all zeros. The device will be left at the DMZ interface. That is the only physical interface that we associated under this virtual domain. The gateway will be a router or a VLAN that is part of our management network. And as we mentioned before, that will be our core router, which is configured for 101.1. Therefore, let's go ahead and enter that address for the gateway. 101.1. Let's also put in a comment here that this is the default gateway for our management virtual domain. And we'll say OK to add this route. Now remember, this default route will not interfere with the other default route that we added under the root domain. We partitioned our firewall into two firewalls. So this default route will only apply for routing through this virtual firewall. Let's confirm if we can ping the DMZ interface from our computer that's connected to that network. So the address is 101.19 and we can. Therefore, let's confirm if we can manage our firewall using that address. Okay, great. Let's add an exception. And let's log in. Okay, and of course doing this, we see that yes, we can access and manage our firewall through the management virtual domain. So that's what virtual domains do, virtualizing your firewall into many isolated firewalls. So if I go back to our virtual domains, and let's go under the interface page, but only within the management domain. So that's here under network. Okay, and on this page, you see only our DMZ interface that is listed. And when we go to the interface page for the root domain, you will see all of our other production interfaces and sub interfaces with the exception of the DMZ interface, which we already associated to a different virtual domain. So that will conclude this video for learning how to set up virtual domains on a FortiGate firewall.